Hello everybody and welcome to the FlatCath podcast. This is a little bit of an impromptu episode, not because I did not have an episode prepared, but because we had a little bit of a family situation and I thought that I was not going to be able to have the time after all to record today and post an episode today Monday, but things fell in place and I ended up having about 30 minutes to kill. So hopefully I am able to convey the message that I was planning to convey on today in this space of a limited time than usual. So essentially the topic of this episode is going to be on the significance of the steps to the altar. All right. So we live in a world where symbolism is very, very much important. So and we go from everything, and especially when it comes to the things of God, especially when it comes to the things of God and to those things that He has ordered for our sanctification, or that the church has ordered for Him, for our very same sanctification and for our very own good. So then we get to sort of a spot and a little bit of a difficulty in this day and age, because we have the synodal church, the Novus Ordo church, also known as that. But I think that some of us are starting to migrate from the Novus Ordo church term into the term the synodal church, because that's simply what they are calling themselves. And it's a very, very accurate term, because we do have to make a decision for ourselves. We have to make a decision for ourselves. Are we members of the Catholic Church, or are we members of the synodal church? So that is one of the questions that I'm posing today. Now, one thing that I noticed that I did not see a lot of people talking about, and maybe people have in the decades prior, because this remodeling of this altar is going on about 30 years. And I'm talking about the remodel and the destruction of the altar at the altar of the chair of St. Peter in St. Peter's Basilica. This altar in the late 1990s, St. John Paul II had that altar removed, and they had a table installed in front of it. However, they did not remove the steps. So this weekend, when I saw the pictures of Cardinal Burke offering the traditional Latin Mass at St. Peter's Basilica at the altar of the chair of St. Peter, or the altar of St. Peter's chair, I thought, wait a second. Why is this altar like a pool table, basically just sitting flat on the ground? Even Novus Ordo altars and Novus Ordo setups will go ahead and include the steps to the altar. I believe that even in the Novus Ordo, in some aspects, they still consider the steps important, at the very least for a practical purpose. But in this new table at the formerly altar of the chair of St. Peter, there are no steps. You can see Cardinal Burke standing just flat on the ground, and they put like a rug there just to maybe for some more ornamentation or something. And what they ended up doing was that they put some clerics or seminarians or something like that where the steps would usually go. So it's a very, very odd look out there, where it pretty much, for the onlookers, for anybody that is not 100% familiar even with the Novus Ordo liturgies, they would have thought that it was just a Novus Ordo. And in Rome, it's very common to see Novus Ordo masses in Latin or in Italian. So for the onlookers, it would have seemed like a Novus Ordo mass, because they had seminarians or clerics standing in front, in between the table and the former altar. And then even those seminarians, they were using the former altar steps as a platform to stand, where they could come out in pictures or look at what was going on at the table. Fascinating. And then I started thinking, wait a second, we always have steps up to our altars in Catholic churches. Even in small chapels, there's always at the very least one step. So I started doing some research, and that's what I was preparing the show for today, regarding what is the meaning of the steps to the altar in the Catholic liturgical life. So we have some notes prepared here that I want to talk about. So the symbolism starts with a symbolism of ascent and holiness. The altar, as a place where the Eucharistic sacrifice is offered, is considered the holiest part of any church. That's why even in churches, the most important altar is called the high altar, and even the side altars are considered holier spaces than the rest of the church. Of course, the altar symbolizes the presence of Christ in the heavenly sanctuary. And usually there are steps that are providing like a platform for the altar, and this come to emphasize a difference between the profane and the holiness. So in the prayers at the foot of the altar in the traditional Latin Mass, we say, I will go to the altar of God. And so even in that psalm, there's an implication of ascending. So we are ascending from our profane existence, from our profane worldliness, to something that is sacred, something that is holy, and that is higher than we are. And sort of those steps help us to have that symbolism right there, which has always been very important in the life of the church. Ascending the steps represents a movement from the earthly to the divine, a spiritual journey toward holiness. So here we go. This is very important. So the steps, at least in the life of the church in the past, they've symbolized the ascent of us to holiness. There are, of course, biblical and theological roots for the steps. The imagery of ascending steps draws from biblical traditions, such as Jacob's ladder. Okay, that's Genesis 28:12. The ascent to the temple in Jerusalem, Psalm 24:3. Who shall ascend the hill of the Lord? Or the vision of the heavenly altar in Revelation. The steps signify the priest and the faithful approach to God's presence, requiring reverence and purity. Okay, again, this is very, very important. And then we have the symbolism of the 3 steps, frequently interpreted as representing the theological virtues, faith, hope, charity, or the Holy Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Again, there's nothing that just happens by coincidence in the Catholic Church, much less when it's things that are related to the altar, to the holy worship of God, and to the sacred liturgy. Then, of course, there's going to be a liturgical function and the role of the priest. We know in a solemn high mass, for example, in the tradition of the church, we know that the priest is at the highest point of the altar, and then the ministers sort of form a line behind the celebrant, and then do multiple functions in those steps, which are very important in the different liturgical functions of the church traditionally. So yes, again, we're going back to the prayers at the foot of the altar and entering a sacred space to offer the sacrifice on behalf of us, on behalf of the faithful, of those of us that are not priests. Okay? In the traditional Mass, the ascent is accompanied by specific prayers as well. So we do have to remember that. There is a silent prayer that the priest says as he is going up the steps of the altar. And I'm not entirely sure that that's retained in another sort of Mass, but I really couldn't tell you because I don't really know. And so, again, in the terms of practicality, in the terms of ascending up to the altar, it's a process. It's not usually, at least in a full church, it's not just one step. It's a process of going up the steps. And that allows for a deeper encounter of the priest with his divine master that he's encountering. So then, getting into the practical considerations of when it comes to architecture, of course, the elevation on the altar steps does ensure that the altar is seen by the congregation. We all know we're sitting among different people that are maybe sitting in front or to our side, and having the altar elevated has a very practical function to it, to actually be able to see the altar. And it creates also even a distinction. So we usually have the rails that create a distinction between the nave of the church and the sanctuary, and then the steps add that grade and that degree of holiness, going from the regular sanctuary into the altar. So there's even that separation from the sanctuary into where the altar is set. Of course, the steps can be traced back to early basilicas, which adapted elements from Roman and Jewish temple architecture. The raised altar, approached by steps, mirrored the layout of the Jerusalem temple, where the Holy of Holies was elevated and accessible only to priests. Again, all of those things are going to be very important in the life of the church, and that's why, at least prior to Sacrosanctum Concilium in the Second Vatican Council, one was not able to just get rid of these things. Okay, so this is going to be very fascinating as we continue our analysis here, and again, done in a very brief manner because I had some family situations where we just had to run, but I had about 30 minutes to be able to go ahead and take care of this, because I had already done all my research for this show, and I was already very, very shocked at seeing this table, which we've seen it before, because there has been the I was going to say Sacrosanctum Concilium, the Summorum Pontificum Masses before. So this is not something new, but this is something new that jumped out to me as I was looking at the pictures and noticing the banality of just having an altar in such a holy, or what is supposed to be such a holy and sacred space, just laying flat on the ground as if it was just a pool table. Really, that's what those sort of altars end up being. And so, Of course, we have to add on the dimension of sacred geometry, because in medieval and Baroque church design, the number and arrangement of steps were often planned with careful attention to numerology and symmetry, aligning with broader cosmological and theological themes in sacred architecture. Okay? All right. Now, the mystical and the mystical and eschatological dimensions. This is a journey to heaven. The Holy Mass is ascension into the Holy Mount, into the Holy Altar of Almighty God. It's where heaven and the earth meet. The high altar of a church is the most sacred space in a church, and this is what it ends up symbolizing and showing us the sacramental reality of heaven and earth meeting right in front of our eyes. Okay? The ascent to the altar prefigured the ultimate ascent to the heavenly Jerusalem, where the faithful would join the eternal liturgy described in the book of Revelation. The steps thus connected the earthly liturgy to the eternal worship of God in heaven. There we go. We have to have connections for us as humans, because these things show us the reality of what we are experiencing, which our eyes may not be showing us as we are going through all of these things. We, of course, have the scholarship that was done prior to the Second Vatican Council regarding the symbolism of ascending the altar, of the steps of the altar, and not just having the altar laying flat on the ground. This is preconciliar theology, okay? The Council of Trent and its aftermath reinforced the altar's centrality in Catholic worship. Again, Catholic worship, and the steps served to elevate the dignity in response to Protestant critiques of Catholic sacramental theology. Protestants hate Catholic sacramental theology. The synodalists, the Provostians, Bergoglians also do hate Catholic sacramental theology. Again, all of these things, none of them, ladies and gentlemen, none of them are a coincidence. That we see a lot of the profanation of our sacred altars, of our sacred spaces, in alignment with what the Protestants would have loved to see in their time, and I'm talking here about the Reformers. Of course, when it comes to the Second Vatican Council, okay, the emphasis was shifted. Sacrosanctum Concilium, which is the Constitution on the Sacred Liturgy, encouraged a noble simplicity in liturgical spaces, leading to the construction of altars with fewer or no steps. The focus moved toward greater participation of the laity and less emphasis on the hierarchical separation symbolized by the steps. Of course, in traditional communities, we still see the steps. We still see the high altars and the altars to the wall, so to speak. And this is going to be something very fascinating that was destroyed by the modernists, but we very often don't even think about this. And again, I didn't even think about this until I saw the setup at the Summorum Pontificum Mass in St. Peter's Basilica, and I said, this looks very banal. There's supposed to be heaven and earth, and we have the Cardinal Burke just standing flat on the ground. Again, very banal. But that's what the Novus Ordo Church, and there are Latin Masses within the Novus Ordo Church, and they end up promoting banality, or they end up promoting a sense of the sacred that is not complete. So we have pictures of the nice vestments and so on and so forth, but this is all offered at a new altar, which is designed to alter and to damage our Catholic sensibilities. This is something that we really have to be very much attuned to and paying attention. We have a quote here from Don Granger, which is famous and beloved in the traditional world for the liturgical year, who says, the altar on which is offered the sacrifice of the new law is the most sacred thing in the whole church, for it represents Christ himself, who is both priest and victim. It is raised above the ground to signify the eminence of the mystery accomplished there, and it is approached with profound reverence, as if one were drawing near the throne of God. Adrian Fortescue, a renowned also liturgical scholar, the altar is the most sacred part of the church, and every care must be taken to approach it with the reverence due to the place where the holy sacrifice is offered. The priest ascends the steps with decorum, mindful of the divine presence. So the steps were not something that was taken lightly, or that was even taken for granted in preconciliar theology, preconciliar studies. Now, a lot of us say, after Vatican II, and with the new Mass, it is actually a worship of man. And what better example, ladies and gentlemen, what better example of this can we come up with than them getting rid of the steps to the altar? This is highly symbolic, and I don't think that we even consider it, because we get our Catholic sensibilities are under attack 24/7 in the new church, even online with these pictures, because we are being told, hey, this is a Catholic Mass. But of course, days before, as we saw in this show as well, we had Cardinal Berg saying that he does not oppose the teaching or governance of Dr. Prevost. Seems to me the more that we are seeing these things, the more that I am seeing these things, the more diabolic the whole thing seems. Now, what do you think about this? Okay, make sure to like this video prior to getting out, and leave your comments below, because we are under very confusing times. The powers that be are trying to confuse us and to destroy Catholic sensibilities, and at least in this channel, hey, with our families, with your family and my family, we are fighting tooth and nail against this. Thank you everybody for watching. God bless you. Again, like this video before you leave, and leave me your comments. What do you think about the destruction of our Catholic sensibilities? This is the FlatCath podcast. I'm your host, Alberto. See you all on Thursday, God willing. Thank you so much.